The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
You know, to the untrained eye, it may look as though we planned to have our 30-team NBA one-by-one wrap-up conclude right at the 2018 NBA draft. To the trained observer, however, you'll probably sit back and think, well, those idiots just got lucky. I have news for you. These idiots just got lucky. We did not plan that. It's just the way it shook out. You know, we had a day off here and there from covering the teams, and then all of a sudden, boom, the draft was here. And the very next day, we finished up talking about all 30 teams in the NBA. Adrian and Neil doing a wonderful job on Friday's show breaking down the results of the 2018 NBA draft. And now we segue into basically what amounts to, well, let's see here, the 25th of June. 1 week, really. We have 1 week here, today through Friday, where we can talk a little bit about the draft results, a little more on that front, and then get you set for free agency. Because that moratorium starts on Sunday, and then players can sign just a couple days later, right? They've shortened the moratorium period because of DeAndre Jordan. Let's be honest, you can call it the DJ rule. So next week, we're going to start the ramp-up. We're there, man. We're already at the ramp-up. We're 1 week away. We're not there. We're almost there. Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today, by the way. I am Dan Besbris, your gracious host. Here's what we got coming up this week. I want to spend a few seconds on that. I'll give you the whole breakdown of what we got going on around here. First and foremost, this is, of course, a hoop ball presentation. I'm doubting many of you are new listeners here in the offseason, but given the fact we did just have the NBA draft and free agency is coming up, motoring around that final turn here, there may be a handful of you that haven't listened in before. So welcome. If you're new to the program, welcome to the show. You can follow Hoopball on Twitter at HoopBallFantasy. I am on Twitter at Dan Besbris. Hoop-ball.com is the website. You're going to go check that out. I strongly suggest that you do. Other little piddling notes here and there. We had a Kings pod released. That was, I think, late last week. Might have been over the weekend even. Friday or Saturday. The draft reaction show with our buddy Christian Villery. It was a long one, by the way. 2-part show. Whopper of a pod. So that's Kings specific, obviously. We do not have a Lakers podcast out with draft reactions because, let's be honest, Laker fans are going to turn that into a lot of information, but it's not that much information. The later picks, that's what they got. They were fortunate to have anything. They managed to squeeze it out of some trade deadline stuff. The Laker news going on right now remains LeBron, Kawhi Leonard, Paul George, and we will talk about that as well. So here's what we got coming up. Over the next few days. As I mentioned, we're going to be talking a little bit about draft results. On today's program, by the way, we're going to be looking a little bit at our gracious benefactor, Mr. Aaron Bruski, the creator of Hoop Ball, put out an article yesterday with his thoughts on the 2018 draft. And today, he put out his Hoop Ball free agent ranking list. So that's going to be stuff we discuss this week. We're going to talk about his draft thoughts and where you can read more about that on today's program. Today's podcast, by the way, is going to be largely about setting the stage for the next month or so of the offseason, right? Every once in a while, like one show out of every 20 or 30 in the offseason, I like to just take a step back, not dive headfirst into basketball information, and instead just say, okay, here's where we are, here's what we've done, here's what we have coming up. It's, I'll admit, like a clip show, if you're watching an old sitcom, which nobody really wants, but are to some degree necessary because, you know, the writers are on strike or tired or something. So here's what we got coming up. As I mentioned, we're going to talk about free agents. We're going to talk about the draft. We're going to talk about the timeline. We're going to talk about when we're going to get into other stuff. We're going to talk about what to be expected even over the next couple of days. And we're also going to talk about hoop ball in general. One thing that I wanted to do, not so much today, but long term, this is a macro issue, is I really want to make sure that I'm doing a good job on this podcast of promoting things we've got going on at hoop ball that aren't for sale, meaning just stuff, just things that are going on at hoop ball. I've already mentioned the podcasts that are out these days, Lakers and Kings shows. You can follow, by the way, all of our Lakers, Kings, Wolves, Blazers, all of our team-specific coverage by going to their Twitter accounts or through the Hoopball homepage. If you go to hoop-ball.com, there is a teams header, and so you can click through that, and it'll give you news on any team, any player that's on the team that you're following. And for the teams that actually have day-to-day beat coverage, it'll take you to that page as well. So that's very easy to find. If you're looking for them on Twitter, it's just at Hoopball and then the team's handle. So at Hoopball Wolves, at Hoopball Lakers, at Hoopball Kings. Very easy. You can follow that formula pretty quick. The Kings one have some really intense coverage. Like, they're really covering it hard these days. That one's been blowing up. At Hoopball Kings. But I realize not all of you listening to this podcast are into those specific teams. And fortunately, if you go to hoop-ball.com, we've got other cool stuff going on right now, namely these massive articles that Brew just put out. I mean, these are the kind of stuff where, let's be honest, in Aaron's Roto World days, these articles would be driving ridiculous traffic, and so they should now too. You got a traditional Brewski breakdown on draft day. You got Aaron doing his 2018 Hoopball free agent ranker. I mean, this is significant, and it is a long article. Oh, my goodness. Oh, my, is it long. It's broken down, by the way. I mean, listen, you should just go there yourself. But it's got an overall ranking, restricted free agent ranking, broken down by wings, ball handlers, shooters, swing players, bigs. Crazy stuff. It's also broken down by what their max salary can be. You guys got to check this out. It's not 100% done. Obviously, when players get signed, that will finish it up, and then you can have a better idea of what the fantasy value is going to be. But this is a whopper. So go check that thing out. We're not going to talk about that on today's program, however. Today's program is going to be focused, again, on draft results. You guys know that I really don't have strong feelings on rookies. One thing that I tweeted over the weekend was there are really only a couple of rookies that I would even consider drafting, and those guys are Ayton and Doncic. Maybe Jaren Jackson Jr. Okay, let's call it 2.5 rookies. And here's why. Here's the thing. I think a lot of people get the wrong impression, and such is the modern universe where everything has to be expressed in one sentence or it doesn't count. But that's the beauty of the podcast, because you guys are stuck listening to me for a half an hour, which means I can usually clarify my remarks. I hate rookies. I am the Rick Carlisle of fantasy team owners. I don't draft them. I don't play them. I am fully aware that at some point in their NBA careers, guys like Damian Lillard, Karl Anthony Towns, Anthony Davis, Joel Embiid were rookies and were productive during their rookie seasons. But a lot of these guys, the vast majority, were not productive. Think about the hype coming into this most recent NBA season. Just this most recent one. Let's just take one example, because you could go through the annals of history, and I'm sure you could find examples of both sides. This year, the guys coming out of the draft, Markelle Fultz, Lonzo Ball, Jason Tatum, Josh Jackson, De'Aaron Fox, Jonathan Isaac, Lauri Markkanen, Frank Ntilikina, Dennis Smith Jr., Zach Collins, Malik Monk, Luke Kennard, Donovan Mitchell, Bam Adebayo, Justin Jackson, Justin Patton, DJ Wilson, TJ Leaf, John Collins, Harry Giles, Terrence Ferguson, Jared Allen, OG Anunoby, Tyler Lydon, a guy whose name I can't pronounce, from Latvia, Caleb Swanigan, which I guarantee is the name of a detective in some poorly watched show. Kuz, Tony Bradley, Derek White, Josh Hart is their first round. I would argue that this draft had more fantasy value in it than almost any that I can remember. And still, you're talking about guys that over a full season, I'm not talking about fits and starts here, over a full season, you basically had Jason Tatum, Lauri Markkanen, and Donovan Mitchell. Yes, there were other guys that were good for stretches. Lonzo Ball started to play better, but then was obviously hurt and missed 40% of the year. So I don't think you can call him a good fantasy value, not if you missed the entire season or half of it. Josh Jackson played well for the last 3 weeks of the year. That doesn't count. Jonathan Isaac, he played well for about a week. I mean, flashed, obviously, massive potential. Dennis Smith Jr., wildly overhyped because he dunked a ball hard one time. Bam Adebayo, he had a stretch where he was solid when both Kelly Olynyk and Hassan Whiteside weren't available. Or at least when Hassan Whiteside was out. You know, bits and pieces here and there. John Collins, he played better after the All-Star break, but it still was sitting around top 100, so it wasn't break-the-bank stuff. Jared Allen, he played well for the last 5 weeks. Josh Hart, he played well for about 3 weeks in there. Kyle Kuzma, he had a really nice season, but was wildly overvalued because he was a scorer. It was a nice year, by the way. I love Kyle Kuzma. You guys know that. I'm a Lakers guy. But, I mean, we're talking about a guy who was getting massive fantasy hype, but ended up as, like, you know, top 115 kind of guy. Because there's no defensive stats. He didn't shoot the ball all that well. Wasn't a good foul shooter. It was mostly points, some rebounds, and three-pointers at the end of the day. So all these guys, everybody getting scooped up. All these lottery picks. Forget the dudes farther down, by the way, because those are the ones, I don't even care about those guys. Because like John Collins having fantasy value by partway through the year, he wasn't heavily drafted. Let's be clear here. Those aren't the guys I have issues with. The guys I have issues with are the ones that come in with insane hype. If you have insane hype, you're going to be overdrafted. It's just as simple as that. It has nothing to do with them being a rookie in that particular case. Lots of players get overhyped. Miles Turner, wildly overhyped this year. And then he got overdrafted. Yusuf Nurkic, overhyped, overdrafted. If you avoid the hype, I mean, this was like, I think this was postseason lesson learned number 1, and it'll probably be lesson learned number 1 every year forever, is don't buy the hype. Because, and this is the important part. This is where numbers come in. If you, in a best case scenario, if you buy the hype, your guy's probably going to end up where you drafted him. You guys follow? In a best case scenario, if you are buying the hype, if you draft a player who is mega hyped, there's your word of the day. Odds are, a best case scenario is they hit that mark. Lonzo Ball. He was a mega hype coming into this season. And so he was getting drafted 40s, 50s. And he does have a really nice fantasy game. But he couldn't shoot. Can't shoot field goals, can't shoot free throws. What a sag on his numbers. insanely positive numbers on the defensive side, rebounds, steals, all these kind of fun things for Lonzo, but those two categories killed him. I mean, he was like top 150, top 200 for a while when those numbers were particularly bad. As they got a little bit better, he climbed fast. But this is a guy who was super hyped and didn't come anywhere near his number. De'Aaron Fox, big-time hype. They had the Dodge De'Aaron stuff from Summer League. Everybody was ducking De'Aaron Fox. Ended up with a terrible fantasy season. Jonathan Isaac, barely played. Dennis Smith Jr., top 150, right? Terrible percentages. Big-time turnovers. Markelle Fultz, barely played. Jason Tatum, there wasn't a ton of hype around him, and then he exceeded it. So he's one of those guys where, you can't really say, there was massive hype on Jason Tatum. This is a guy that was getting drafted in the last round of fantasy leagues. The guys that were hyped, I believed, at least, from listening to the chatter, Fultz, Lonzo Ball, De'Aaron Fox, Dennis Smith Jr., those were probably your lottery guys that were getting a lot of hype. And they all performed worse than their ADP. The guys that overperformed, Jason Tatum, often drafted right near the end of drafts. Lauri Markkanen, he was probably not even going to be drafted until my guy, Niko Mirotic, got punched in the face. And so that's sort of a weird scenario, but we'll give him a positive mark just because it did work out. Donovan Mitchell, who I don't know anybody was even really paying attention to him. Largely undrafted. And then non-lottery guys who were also largely undrafted. Although, I did see Kyle Kuzma go off in like the 70s in some and thought, well, that's odd. That's the Lakers factor, though. That's Lakers built into it. And he had a really nice year, but he didn't hit that mark. So even in that spot, he was overdrafted. So that's what I mean by don't buy the hype. It's not that I don't like these players. I actually really like the fantasy future for a guy like Lonzo Ball because he will get better at shooting. Simply put, he can't get any worse. He'll get better. And it won't take much to rocket him up the charts because he does all those other things. Now, where he ends up, do the Lakers end up trading him? Is he part of the Lakers super team? That'll change what his responsibilities are on the team. But I love his fantasy stat set. It's great. I just didn't like it as a rookie. There's always things that put a hole in it. Dennis Smith Jr., yeah, I think he'll get better as his career goes on. But rookies are plagued by these massive holes in their game. Usually inefficiency, bad field goal percent, bad free throw percent, bad turnovers. 3 categories out of 9 is too much to give away. It's a drag. It's a big drag, and they don't do enough in the other 6 categories to outweigh those things. Translate that to this year. This year, you're looking at these guys like DeAndre Ayton, who comes in with huge hype. I like him. I think he's going to have a nice season in Phoenix because he's going to be basically unchallenged for minutes at the center position. He'll play as much as he can handle. So he'll end up with fantasy value just from being on the floor for a significant amount of time. But you're going to see this dude probably drafted in the 30s and 40s. I'm betting the hype will push him into the 3rd and 4th round, and there's almost no chance he gets that high. Because his 61% field goal shooting from college, that's going to come down. It's not going to be so easy in the NBA when other people are as big as he is. 73% free throw shooting, that's not terrible for a big man, but it's also not going to help you. And the key for him is basically going to be points and rebounds and hopefully okay percentages, and maybe he'll get you like a 3-pointer. He doesn't have the efficiency of a Karl Anthony Towns coming out. He doesn't shoot the free throw quite like that. So there are going to be some small holes. I think you're looking at a guy that, if he's on the floor enough, yeah, he could be a top 60, top 50, top 60 kind of guy. But to me, that's a better case scenario. And he's probably going to get drafted in the 40s, maybe the 50s at the worst. I doubt he falls any farther than that. So when I say don't buy the hype, it's not because I don't think he's going to be a useful fantasy value. I mean, you could get a guy who's ranked, let's go per game here, because I don't know how many games he's going to play this season. Presumably as many as he can. But, they're not competing for a championship yet, so no reason to push him. And he's coming out after 1 year in college, so he's not an old guy. Let's say he ends up as the number 45 guy on a per-game basis. Do you really think he's going to fall much beyond that, right? Like maybe you get him at 48, 52? A best-case scenario, in my opinion, is he performs about a half round better than where you get him. And a worst-case scenario is maybe he doesn't play for a long stretch. They go easy on him. Maybe he gets drafted in the 40s and he ends up as a top 60 guy. So he's a relatively safe pick by all accounts, but there isn't a ton of upside there. Unless he turns around the block profile, which is a good point that Brewski makes in his article, which you guys should read. The other guy that I had an eye on, Luka Doncic, but there's a massive amount of hype around him as well. I liked his landing spot. I love that he ended up with the Mavericks. They have a way of using guys in a sharp fashion. I don't think Rick Carlisle is going to not play him. I know he is a rookie, and I know that I just compared myself to Carlisle, but they're not going to bring this dude in and then just not play him at all. They're going to find a spot for him. He's long, he's strong. He can, I was going to do Sir Mix a lot here. He can play alongside Dennis Smith. He can play alongside Harrison Barnes. Free throw percent was 79%, I think, in the Euro leagues. Okay three-point shooter, excellent ball handler for a medium-sized human being. I think he's going to have a decent year, but I do think he's going to be overhyped. I think you're going to see him get drafted in the 60s, maybe 70s at the latest, and I don't know that he can really go much beyond that. Well, that's the issue here. Someone in this rookie class is probably going to emerge as a solid value, and it's probably going to come from the 7 through 14 range. But who do you take your shot on? Who's the guy you grab late in your draft and hope that they pan out? I don't have that name, at least not yet. I like Bamba in Orlando, but I do think there's too much traffic there. His fantasy game is interesting, but they have Nick Vucevic, they have Bismack Biyombo, they have Jonathan Isaac, we assume they have Aaron Gordon, although who knows. And that's why I would say that maybe the guy that profiles as the most interesting lotto pick right now is number 4, Jaren Jackson Jr. Because the Grizzlies, yes, they have Marc Gasol as their center, but kind of a revolving door everywhere else. JaMychal Green logged most of the minutes at power forward once he was healthy. But, the Grizzlies, they're not making a championship run. Let's not kid ourselves. They'll play better next year, presumably with a healthy Mike Conley. But if they get Jaren Jackson Jr. in there, and I'm not going to say all three of those names every time, I won't do it, and he can block a bunch of shots, then he's a guy that becomes interesting, right? That's what you look for with these rookies. The guys that are going to have a huge opportunity and the guys that can make the most of a more limited opportunity, which would be a guy like Jackson, which would be a guy like Bamba. Does Wendell Carter play in Chicago? Can he see enough minutes with the Bulls? Yeah, maybe. They didn't have a particularly strong center option. But you heard it, man. I'll say it 1,000 times. It's going to be someone you don't expect, which means that all this hype everybody's lumping on dudes, this is probably not where you want to go. If you want to take a shot on somebody that is farther down the list, by all means. But the point, I must emphasize, if you're drafting a rookie in the 13th round of your fantasy draft, it's not a hype issue anymore. If you can take any of these guys in the very last round, fine. Maybe they pan out. But you didn't blow an early pick on them. That's the real key. So when I say I don't draft and I don't play rookies, what I really mean is I don't draft them in a spot where I can get somebody that's I know is going to be good. Because with rookies, you can call it chasing upside, but you're really trying to dodge downside. You're dodging downside. That's my thing. That's what I'm going to call it with these rooks. Fun class, though. A lot of really interesting talent. Just, give them time. If you could draft them, if you could draft the rookies at the All-Star break, put them on your team then maybe you got something going. Okay, once again, what do we got going on this week? That's what I want to emphasize on today's program. Those were my brief draft thoughts. Tomorrow, the Tuesday show, Adrian Benjamins and myself, we will talk a little bit about the draft. I'll get his thoughts. We can bounce some ideas off each other. I know he talked to Neil on Friday, but we'll follow up on that. We'll also start to get into free agency a little bit. Wednesday, you'll have me going solo. It'll be mostly an update on the NBA news of the day. Neil and myself on Thursday, and then Neil and Adrian on Friday. This is the 1 week. This is like our free agent moratorium because next week, free agency. It's happening, man. We are only about a week away. It'll be during next week's shows. That counts, right? I'm fudging the numbers a little bit. Incredible. And then, of course, I would strongly recommend you familiarize yourself with Aaron's 2018 Hoopball free agent ranker. It will be filled in as guys get signed. You can look at all the names on the list. There are a bunch. And I think he profiled 73 of them. I don't know. Tweet at him. Bug him if you want. He's got this stuff out now. I'll bug him. I'll bug him on your behalf if you prefer. I am at Dan Besbris on Twitter. If you want to give me a follow, please do. Take a moment today. You know what I haven't told you guys to do in weeks? Take a moment to rate and review the podcast. I haven't even looked to see if anybody has done it in a while. Honestly, I don't even remember what our number was the last time I looked. It's been forever. I'll look while I'm doing the podcast right now. 153 rankings. I don't know where we were before. I assume that's more. Whatever. Let's see if we can get to 155. Can two of you listening to this podcast rate and review the show on iTunes or the podcast app on your mobile device? That's all I'm asking. Two people today, which I realize is actually significant. These ratings and reviews are hard to get. The most important thing, I did some intense reading on this a couple months back, and I think I talked about it on one podcast, but I should do it more. The algorithms that iTunes uses to rank these things are largely based on active listeners and active subscribers. So if you're out there and you have not yet subscribed to any of our Hoopball podcasts, subscribe to all of them. Do it all through iTunes, because that'll rocket us up the charts. More people will be able to find it, and we'll be able to continue to do more cool stuff here at Hoopball. By the way, you are doing it already, so thank you to those that have already done so. That's why Hoopball continues to grow. It's why we continue to put out additional shows. We're up to 4 podcasts now, if you include the Cause and Brew show as well. And we will have more by the end of the offseason. I can promise you that. Thanks for listening, everybody. This was your Monday show. Wanted to keep it on the short side, and I did. Again, Adrian Benjamins and myself will be back with you tomorrow. Continued draft thoughts and our first look into free agency. Have a lovely Monday. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoopball presentation.